I'd like to introduce Dan Kreeger, who's the moderator of the next panel. I met Dan about, I think, 10 years ago. He founded the National Association of Climate Change Officers. We talked earlier about the role of states and localities, subnationals, filling in the gap that our national government has left. And that's precisely what this association is all about. It's equipping the subnational climate change officers in public service to do their jobs. So with that, I know you're getting mic'd up, Dan, but when you're ready, take it away.
Well, thank you all. It's great to be back here. I'm getting my notes in front of me here in the digital age. There we go. Now we're connected. Kind of connected. We're 4/5 connected. All right. Well, while we're getting that situated. So for those of you who were here last year, you'll remember some of us actually on this stage spoke last year in different roles. So, I talked about, I see climate change as a human capital issue. Simply, if you don't have the right people with the right skills in the right parts of organizations, you're not going to succeed in anything, and climate change is the ultimate exacerbator and stressor of that. Well, one of the things that we've seen happening in the transformation of leadership in this country is we've seen subnational government have to raise their game on climate change, and with the pullout of the Paris Agreement, we saw all sorts of subnational government entities, from state and local governments to the state with the U.S. Climate Alliance, local governments with the We're Still In and the U.S. climate mayors, and companies saying, no, we need to abide by this ideal. We need to achieve a 2 degrees maximum increase in temperatures. And so what we wanted to do is have a conversation with what's compelling cities to really raise their game here. Why is it so important for cities to not only tackle this head on, but to be leaders, to drive change in their peers, in their own communities, to engage their public? So that's going to be our conversation for the next half hour, or 28 minutes and 10 seconds. So I'm joined at my left by Mayor Skadron from the city of Aspen, just down the road. Mayor Burns from Oregon. We've got Clint and Kinney sitting in for Mayor of Snowmass, who was unable to make it this morning. So Clint's the town manager for the city of Snowmass Village, and Tim McCollough from the city of Fort Collins Utilities, which is a municipally owned utility in Fort Collins, Colorado. So Mayor Burns, I know you've got some visuals that you wanted to kickstart this conversation with. So why don't you kick us off?
Okay. All right, so for those of you who were here last year, you might have seen a little bit of my presentation. I live in the Columbia River Gorge, about an hour east of Portland, and our little town had a Bakken crude oil train derail and catch fire 2 years ago. And that really put us on the forefront of this whole climate conversation. We were really lucky it was a windless day, and that was the only reason our town was not wiped out. But it was incredibly traumatic for the town. One of the things that happened right away is the Indian tribes arrived, and that was also partially due to Riverkeeper bringing them in, and Bobby Kennedy came. And 5 tribes from the Northwest came and basically began the process of our healing. And it also opened us up to the idea of collaboration on the larger systems. Our 2 senators, Wyden and Merkley, also came and joined, and they actually proposed the Mosier Act to the Senate floor, which didn't go very far, and also started a conversation with NTSB about train safety. We started an IGA with the Fire City and School to try to negotiate with the railroad in a peaceful way versus being litigious, and that was a 1.5-year process run by volunteers. Now, as irony would have it, in the meantime, Union Pacific was planning a 5-mile track expansion at the very same place where the train derailed. So the Safe Energy Leadership Alliance, which is Dow Constantine of King County, he also came to our town. And we started really working on this thing of getting all the electeds along the whole tracks involved in not only the infrastructure development happening, but also the larger issues like Standing Rock, and to try to stop some of the stuff. So this required going to just tremendous amount of meetings. In the meantime, for the double tracks, our little town had no right to oppose the railroad because of eminent domain. So we were dependent on our county commissioners and the larger field, which happened to be the tribes. And so they ended up opposing the railroad, who then sued everybody who was helping us. And that included 3 Confederate tribes, Friends of the Gorge, the Physicians for Social Responsibility, and that is now in Ninth Circuit Court. But this brought this conversation of, the railroad is a great way to say we're all connected. So in Portland, I ended up testifying and helping them pass no new fossil fuel resolution there. In San Luis Obispo, we stopped a Union Pacific spur. I joined the Climate Mayors, which is 70 million people when you put us all together, and it starts being a pretty substantial bunch, even though only 450 are my people. And then also went to Chicago with Steve. He's in the back there. I think he's ducking for this North American Climate Summit. And basically all of this is a realization that the infrastructure in the city, county, state level has the power to really shift things, that just despite what's going on a federal level, we're really motivated right now to be that change. So we went back to town after Chicago, and on our strategic plan, we implemented all of the elements of the climate charter of Chicago. We also passed a plastic bag ban, a straw ban, a styrofoam ban. We haven't banned everything. They are dancing. You can still do. And then we have, from the money from the railroad, we are building a civic center and a fire station that's all net zero, and Rocky Mountain Institute is helping us with some of our ordinances, and also Energy Trust of Oregon to help us have a LEED certified building. We also stopped the largest proposed terminal in the history of the United States in Vancouver, Washington, which seemed impossible, and this was all to take this Bakken crude oil to China. So it's pretty amazing. Our little town, our motto is small enough to make a difference, and we are part of this larger web that has been, and we are the story, we're a voice of this whole fossil fuel infrastructure conversation. So the last thing we're doing is trying to help the scenic area, the National Scenic Area, which we are one of 13 towns within, to try to find climate policy language for their new management plan. So if any of you guys have ideas on that, we're all ears. Okay, that's Mosier.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, I love that photo, by the way. I'm glad to hear that we still have dancing liberty in place here. So,
Okay.
Mayor Skadron, you and I got to start playing in the sandbox here last spring. You've been doing some pretty amazing things with the city of Aspen for a couple of years now, just in Aspen, and then you decided, I need to exert myself elsewhere. Tell us a little bit about that journey. Yeah.
In 2005, Aspen created a program called the Canary Initiative, and it was our attempt to reduce our carbon footprint. Part of that program was to get us to 100% renewable energy in our municipal utility. And we set off on a 10-year plan to get there. In July of 2015, we accomplished it, and we're one of a handful, 2 or 3 cities across the United States that are running their utilities on 100% renewable power. I was invited, following that accomplishment, to Paris, to COP21, to participate in an event called the Climate Summit for Local Leaders that Mayor Bloomberg from New York City, Bloomberg Philanthropies, put on alongside COP21 with the Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo. At that event, I happened to have the opportunity to speak on a number of platforms, and I reached an international audience, which was really extraordinary for a small communities like ours. I came home from that event, so understanding the impact and the influence we could have, I came home from that event and I said to my climate team, I want to recreate this event I attended in Paris and scale this international event to Colorado. So we could position Aspen as a leader in the state of Colorado and Colorado itself as a leader nationally to address these climate issues. So we created this program called the Compact of Colorado Communities, which was a network of Colorado communities who committed to take action on climate issues in their communities. And it's happened to gain a lot of momentum, much thanks to Dan's help, and become a model that other states nationwide are now emulating.
So I think you're selling yourself short on this, though, because this is not just a network of communities working together. It is the first place in the country and probably the world where cities and counties have passed resolutions requiring that their elected officials, city managers, and senior staff go through annual climate change training. And right now we're at 26 with 2 more pending to be 28. That makes it's law. Yeah. That's a game changer. That doesn't exist anywhere, and not just in the context of staff, but elected officials. When I came to you with this idea, I've been saying, I've said it in this room, I've said it around the country. You were the first to say, yes, and I'm going to bring people around on this. What about that clicked for you? And said, yeah, we're not just going to be a network, we're going to operationalize this.
Well, what really motivated me, Dan, was the notion that we needed to get done locally what isn't currently prioritized at state or national levels. And I saw the success we were having locally, but we alone as a community of 7,000 people aren't going to solve climate change or keep the plastic bags out of the oceans, even though we have a plastic bag ban. But what we can do is use our brand power as a lever to push on policy change, and that's what I wanted to initiate.
So Clint and Tim, you guys also signed on and you were at the launch meetings, your respective leadership. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing here in Snowmass. You're the host.
Sure.
The host with the most here.
So the host with the most, that's the mayor. I'm the bureaucrat. So we're doing a lot of things. I'm proud to say that we set some goals back in 2008, similar to Aspen. We're about halfway towards meeting a lot of those goals. So that's the great news. I think the bad news for us, is that it's getting harder. We've eaten a lot of that low-hanging fruit. We've done the solar, we're looking at hydro, we've done the efficiency improvements. And now when we try and are close that gap to hit that goal, it's getting more difficult. We joined the compact to help us get over this hump. But what we're finding is this hump is a big hump. And we're running into the things that affect real people with costs, with views, with stuff that's almost NIMBY. And we're trying to find ways to continue to tackle it, to continue to make progress for it, and it's getting more and more difficult. And it's fun. When you're in a group like this, you think, oh, there's this huge wave of support, everybody loves this. And then when you get out there and you do it, you find out that's not 100% true all the time. And so we're really working hard to figure out how do we make those incremental improvements, all those improvements we can to get that goal. And then, but recognizing that it's not everybody's on board with us, and we're struggling with that. We continue to, but I'm going to end with kind of the good news is we're halfway there, and we're on track. But now we know the real work's ready to start. 20% by 2020.
So, Tim, at the event that Mayor Burns showed us in Chicago, the city of Fort Collins is actually recognized by C40 Cities and Bloomberg for its work. You're both you have two perspectives, your city, your municipally owned utility, and you work within the utility. Share a little bit from that perspective.
Well, I've spent hopefully half my career now in utilities, and I can tell you for the last 20 years, the only time my phone rings is when the lights are out. And I think as a utility professional, I've been conditioned to only think about reliability, only think about cost. Just within the last year and a half, with really the initiative on RE100, we now have commitments from corporations just in our jurisdiction, Fort Collins, for renewable energy commitments of some scale and timeline that equates to 20% of our annual energy just in our community. Now my phone is ringing for calls about renewable energy. That's a significant shift in just my world as a utility professional. From the city of Fort Collins, we've had a climate journey that goes back to grassroots movements coming out of events like that. That has to happen at the political level and at the staff level within the communities to protect our people, our infrastructure, our economies, and our social structures.
And Snowmass and Aspen, you guys are both also involved in another convening of local governments here that's trying to shape state policy, the Colorado Communities for Climate Action, CC4CA. So you've got two groups of communities working on different things, operationalizing climate change and integrating it into decision-making, another one that's trying to change policy. What have some of your experiences been? And then Mayor Burns, how are you guys engaging with, what sorts of structures are coming in place for you in Oregon to engage with your communities in shaping policy?
Just real briefly, I'll let these guys speak. I think for us in the state, it's great when the West Slope and the Front Range can combine on a topic, because then we really get listened to. Otherwise, we have a way of dividing our state up on different issues. And this is one where I was kind of pleasantly surprised when I went to the compact meeting how much statewide attention was being paid to it. It was great that it wasn't just a resort community, the West, or the people with rivers in the towns. It was everybody. And I think that's had a real big impact for us.
For us, I think it's been showing up at the state capitol, Salem, and it's a long drive there and back, but it's actually putting a face on the issues. And I've found that our governor has been pretty much at the table with us. We're sort of a little bit of a darling right now in the state, so we're taking advantage of that and trying to be impeccable in our response to everything, and really trying to push this whole idea of we are the future, let's figure it out collectively.
I have to ask you a question. Had the disaster not happened, would your community still have been motivated to address these issues?
Well, we were already involved with the Safe Energy Leadership Alliance, so we were already fighting the track expansion, but most people in our community had no idea why they wanted the expansion, and that was so that we could have 5 unit trains a day coming through to serve this terminal. So it was a massive wake up. We had a really cohesive council and very progressive, but as far as the rest of the community, then they really saw the dragon breathing down our necks. Yeah. So I think it was this great thing that we took a hit for the team in a way.
Yeah. It was the catalyst.
It was the catalyst.
Energized it.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
I don't recommend it to anybody.
Find a different catalyst. Okay,
right.
Done.
Yeah, and the question you asked earlier, Clint answered. I agree with Clint about these. We have the Compact of Colorado Communities, and there's a second entity called CC4CA. One of the criticisms we heard at the development of the compact was, why is another organization needed around environment? And I think that's a legitimate question, but what we found with this compact and the policy group, CC4CA, is that there is a complement there, as you described it.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I think there's a component of this that is a lesson learned from the Climate Mayors Initiative, right? It's one thing to come out and say, we want policy. We want a stance on policy, we want to shape it. It's another thing to institutionalize and operationalize efforts. Those are vastly different things. You need both of them happening in complement to one another and in concert with one another, and they inform one another. And it's taken a bit of an adjustment. In lots of spaces, you will actually see that the advocacy or coalition is an arm of the operational body. Trade associations are the perfect example, where they represent an industry, they're working together on a vast number of things, and then they have an arm that goes up to Congress. But with local governments, that's been different. Not every state has a group of local governments who've said, we're going to be up in our dome and in the faces of our legislature on a daily basis saying, hey, this Colorado climate plan, this Colorado energy plan. Anyhow, so let me ask you guys a question, because you're different ranges of your experience here, right? So you mentioned 1999, you mentioned the Canary Initiative going back to 2005. If looking back on where you are today versus how you started, what are some of the things that you've each learned in this journey about governance, engaging your community, the journey of just operationalizing this, and almost kind of a what do you wish you knew when you started this adventure?
Yeah, I'll start, and I want to actually comment on one of Clint's messages, and it's an important one. When we were in pursuit of 100% renewables, we too found that the last 15%, 10% was the most difficult. And there were a lot of lessons we learned in pursuing that. One was don't give up. And we did it. Yeah.
Don't give up is, I think, really important. Everybody who works in this space is pushing a big, big boulder up the hill. And if you read more of the reports, like the tripling of the melt rate in Antarctica, it just seems like the hill is steeper and steeper.
Yeah. The rest of that story is, and one of the lessons was, don't give up is important. I stood up in front of the community and said, this is my plan. I believe a community like ours should prioritize environmental stewardship, and a place like Aspen should be leaders locally, regionally, nationally internationally on issues like this, and the community elected me. So I had a mandate to push an agenda, and I did. And the don't give up is important because it is so hard. If you haven't taken your turn in community service, please consider it. When you do, it's really hard to sit on this side of the table, but I'm glad I did. And I had goals to achieve, and we stuck to it and got it done. And I remember a day I stood in front of the community and said, at a public meeting, this is going to cost more. Your energy bills will be higher. Are you willing to absorb this? The additional cost in converting our portfolio to renewables. And the community said, yeah, let's do it.
Okay, next.
Go for it. Chime in whenever you guys
Okay,
want.
so for me, I'm in my 4th year as mayor, and after the 2nd year and right after the train crash, our city attorney sued me, tried to sue me personally, and I would have given up, except I couldn't because you can't let the bully win. And but we had some toxic elements that really, it took a tremendous amount of patience and perseverance to let truth rise to the surface. And I think one of the most important things has been communication with the community in whatever realms we have available. And for us, we have a newsletter that goes out, and we're constantly writing letters to the editor in the local papers and the state papers, and often on the public radio being interviewed. So it's just staying open and staying positive about the solution. And I think that instead of being a victim, instead of woe is us, it's like, here's what we can do. Let us be a template for a new way of being. And people like that. You know, that works, except our attorney didn't like it.
You know, I'll let Dan or Tim speak, but the one lesson that I would put that we've learned, or we continue to learn, is people try to get really small really quick because it seems to be easier, and we continually push ourselves to kind of try and tackle those larger issues. And we think that's going to work better for us, but I couldn't tell you if that's a lesson learned or not, but that's a path we're trying to take, and I'd be interested to see if that's a good path or not. But we're trying not to get too myopic with too simplistic of an answer too early.
I can share from a staff side of a city organization to operationalize climate action has taken structure, has taken governance around climate, from unanimously adopted goals at the council level to embedding climate action in our strategic plan, embedding it in our budgeting process, creating executive steering committees, creating community advisory committees, just like we do in our normal municipal government processes. Climate is embedded in the organization, and that's one of the reasons that we're on track to really blow past our 2020 goals of a 20% reduction of carbon. We're at 17% this year. We have 150 megawatts of wind coming online, another 20 megawatts of solar, and we're on track to potentially be 40% below our goal just a year after our 20% below goal with those new resources coming online. So embedding that in the culture of the city and the governance and the structure has been key in Fort Collins.
So how are you guys engaging? What sorts of, you mentioned the sorts of op-eds, Mayor Burns, that, you know, in getting the word out. What other tactics are you guys using for building public awareness and understanding of this? I mean, at some point, invariably, you're going in front of your public and saying, I need X dollars to do Y, and that's how it affects our mission of serving you. How are you guys getting that message across, and what's working, what's not?
Well, we create programs like CORE, which is the Community Office for Resource Efficiency. We create water conservation projects. We talked about a landscaping ordinance last night at City Council. We created the largest rural mass transit system in the country. It's running in our valley. And then we invite the community and our visitors to participate in the programs. So we stand up in front of the community and say, this is what we want to do. We do it, and then we go back to the community and say, join us. So
you're leading, which is interesting because historically, civil servants have said we have to be responsive to what the public is calling for. But in this particular case, you're actually in possession of information that the general public doesn't have. Yeah. So you're taking some steps, and then you're engaging them with it.
Yeah, you know, around climate issues, I've argued, I often look through the economic lens, which resonates across the board. And in a community like Aspen, I've argued that the strength of our local economy is directly tied to the health of our natural environment. So programs like this one will benefit all community members across the spectrum. So.
In our town, we have very little resource for staff, for example. So we have been very effective at reaching out into things that are available on a larger level, including environmental organizations in our area, Riverkeeper and Friends of the Columbia Gorge, including grants. So we're not coming asking people for money, we're getting the money and saying, hey, look what we're gonna do for you. And especially with renewable energy concepts like this net zero building, their first reaction was, it's gonna cost us so much. And actually, it's gonna save us a whole lot of money for a really long time once we have this building. So I think a lot of it is just finding the resources that are out there and pulling them in, because we can't possibly have all that expertise ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is what I spoke to earlier. We have the political support, the political will to do it, and now we're on that hump trying to get it to that community support. And I'm listening to this answer because I don't have a great one for this one.
I think I touched on it earlier, embedding these climate processes in the structure of our budget. Our community's involved with that process as well.
So we've got about 3 minutes left. I want to give the audience at least a chance to put a question or two up for the panel. So do we have microphones still moving around the room? I probably just caught you off guard. Let me just mention the kind of impact that you guys can have way outside your boundaries while we're waiting for the microphone. So I brought the head of the Maryland State Agency to the Colorado Community Symposium in February. And he just kind of sat in the room and he watched the whole thing play out. And then he went back and he said, you know what? We're building a climate academy in Maryland. Maryland just announced the first state-sponsored climate academy in the country. Their trajectory ultimately is going to be to say, if you want our dollars for restoration or infrastructure projects, local governments and infrastructure organizations, you're going to need to show us that you're going to be good stewards for those dollars. You have to go through the training that the Maryland Climate Academy will provide. That's the kind of ripple effect that you can have with you having said, yeah, we're going to do this at the local level here. Now you've got a state in Maryland that's doing this that will hopefully lead to other states taking on those sorts of steps as well. Go ahead.
So your presentations are a great light at the end of the tunnel. Local action is really exciting, and you are leading the charge. Distributed energy using solar at the residential and commercial level is very, very important to being part of the solution. And I'm wondering what each of your communities are doing to encourage citizens and businesses to begin to use solar now that it is so economically attractive, and also what the compact is doing in the state of Colorado. I just want to note that I believe the last data I saw in Colorado, residential solar growth has gone backward by 3%. So that gives real impetus to the question. Thank you.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that we create programs and then invite the community to join those programs. We have in place here something called REMP. It's the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program. And what we've done is essentially create an energy budget for a residential property. And should the property exceed that energy budget, they're required to mitigate for that excess. And they can either do it by establishing renewables on their own property or pay a fee. That fee goes into a community fund that can be accessed by homeowners or nonprofit entities who would then use that money to do exactly what you're saying, put solar panels on their properties. So we've created programs, provided a funding mechanism, and allowed the community to participate.
Tim, you're a utility. I know the hair on your neck goes up when we have this conversation. 20 seconds, bam.
Wow. Well, I would agree that distributed energy, distributed storage, all of the distributed assets are going to be a key future for our energy economy. As we move towards more renewables that are intermittent in nature, we're going to have those distributed assets. We have programs in place with solar rebates and if you have $1 to spend it on energy efficiency first before you spend it on renewable energy. You'll be better in the end for that. But I would add to that, even in Fort Collins, there's not enough raw rooftop area to meet the energy demand. So It may meet a third of that. We're going to need to build solar at scale. We're going to have to build wind at scale. It's going to require investment, transmission lines, and the infrastructure to realize that energy future that we will need.
Okay, I've been granted the appeal for the one more question.
So since y'all are in Colorado, Steve, you are head of the I guess Ski Towns Association, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Aspen is much greater as a brand, as a name. Snowmass could be also. So as you go, well, no offense, but with 20%, you can't reach that. You'd need to be at 100% because Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm from, has already got to go up 100%. So I know you can beat Atlanta. We're a bigger town, more complication and problems. But my point is, we'd like to challenge y'all to the Better Buildings Challenge also. So more buildings under energy efficiency and all that. I think making it a fun competition where we all learn from each other's struggles is my point. And with Rocky Mountain Institute right in your backyard, y'all are at the launching pad. So if you give just a quick answer on how y'all can utilize that resource and how we can all work together, maybe we just meet afterwards and talk about it. Thank you.
All right, well, please join me in thanking our great community leaders here. And I know the science is bleak. We've got a challenge in front of us, but you know what? If we really mobilize, we can build an army and get good at things. We can tackle this. Thanks, and looking forward to the rest of the remarks.
Thank you.